it, you know, we're all born with a unique set of sensitivities and gifts and strengths, and that will resonate to the present. The more deeply embodied you are, the clearer the resonance. And then you know you're called into service.
So, in the light of what has happened in the last day or so, I wanted to read this short poem by Rashani, who I believe is a Persian poet living in Hawaii. And it's called The Unbroken. And I'll put it in the chat. There is a brokenness out of which comes the unbroken, a shatteredness out of which blooms the unshatterable. There is a sorrow beyond all grief, which leads to joy, and a fragility out of whose depths emerges strength. There is a hollow space too vast for words, through which we pass with each loss, out of whose darkness we are sanctioned into being. There is a cry deeper than all sound, whose serrated edges cut the heart as we break open to the place inside which is unbreakable and whole while learning to sing.
All right, welcome back to now, a second round of wonderful conversation and experience with Philip Shepard. This is the second of two sessions of this Foot in Two Worlds Summit that we're doing in the February of 2018 and beyond for those who are watching this at a later date. And I'm assuming that you all have experienced the first session, and especially the conclusion of the first session, in which Philip took us on that journey that you often describe as the elevator shaft. It was such a for me an inarguable experience of what you were describing to us in the conversation prior to that exercise. And I've kind of renewed my commitment to include your exercises as a regular part of my practices. And another part of the beating heart of the work that Carolyn Baker and I are doing in putting together this summit is to acknowledge that for anyone who is aware of the challenges and the predicaments of our world and plans to have any amount of resilience and presence in the face of those challenges, we must have practices. And that's why we're so thrilled to have you here for not one but two of the sessions, because you make it so abundantly clear that if we are to transform our relationship with the world, there is no more powerful way to commence that process than to transform our relationship with our own body, with our own experience. So I feel newly reinvigorated, reconnected with what I can only imagine is really the foundation, perhaps a small portion of the foundation of your work. I would also like to just reopen the broader conversation for us to be able to go there if it's of interest to you today. I have no question we'll easily fill this second session. But I wanted to read a little bit from the Embodiment Manifesto the first piece of writing that I read of yours that really just whipped my head around, that had me orient to a reconnection with my deeper self, with my own body, as the cornerstone of my practices for reconnection with the web of life. And I think I'm just going to let it speak for itself. So if you wouldn't mind, just sit back, Philip, and enjoy your tea, and let me just read a little bit of your gorgeous writing, if I may. So the Embodiment Manifesto: the blind spot we harbor, the revolution to come. I believe that humanity can survive the crises that are mounting around us, but that our ability to make it will depend upon us forging a new kind of clarity. Specifically, we need to shed light on the story we tell ourselves about what it means to be human. It's a story almost too familiar to question, yet it provokes fantasies of limitless growth and power and puts us on a collision course with the realities of our world. I believe this story is the single greatest danger to our survival. I also believe that the single most dangerous effect of this story is the way it estranges us from our own bodies and makes that feel normal. It is clear to most people that the way we are living is not sustainable. It is clear in the damage we are inflicting on the ecosystem that sustains us, in the cataclysmic rate of species extinction, in the pressures of a growing human population on the Earth's finite resources, and even in the stress we carry in our bodies day in, day out. We try to lessen our impact by changing our behavior, and such changes are important, but their effect is dwarfed by the sheer scale and momentum of what we face. Our instinct to seek more control over our situation is the familiar reflex that created it in the first place. The real challenge we face is to surrender our agendas of control and turn our hearts instead to the task of coming into harmony with our world. Control and harmony are not different degrees of the same impulse. They are opposites. If we are to come into harmony with the world, we need more than adjustments to our way of living. We need a revolution in our understanding of ourselves. To make matters even more challenging, the revolution that is needed sits firmly in our culture's blind spot. This has always been the nature of revolutions. In our case, that blind spot involves our relationship with our bodies. So again, just extraordinary writing. We talked a little bit about one of the ways that Carolyn and I talk about similar issues is our hyper development of a skill called overriding last time, that we have come to master overriding any of the sensitivities that imply our connection with our deeper selves, with each other, and with Earth. We've gotten damn good at it, to the point that we are obviously driving ourselves to the brink. What I'd like to run by you, and what I think I heard you pointing to last time, is that with our hyper development of the skill of overriding our sensitivities, I'm asserting that we've forfeited our agency in life. We've forfeited our presence in life. We've forfeited our ability to locate a sense of core integrity because we've disconnected ourselves from the primary sources of meaning in life themselves. Again, our deeper selves, each other, and the Earth. And I guess what I'm also asserting is that just using these different words that I'm throwing at you now, I think they're ridiculously similar to the words you use in terms of their meaning. I'm asserting with the kind of reconnection that you're suggesting for us, reorienting our experience, literally reorienting the home of our experience, that there is some possibility of us reclaiming some of that agency, reclaiming some portion of that presence, that forfeited presence, and reclaiming a sense of being able to orient or find actually our innate sense of integrity. So I've said a lot. Thanks for sitting through that. And I'm just curious if any of that sparks you to unfold a bit more of your work in your way of saying any of those things. And I'm happy if you're up for disputing any of those things. It just seemed like there was a pretty darn close fit. So if you're inspired by any of the things that I've just mentioned, please. The door is once again kicked open.
Oh, Dean, it's dangerous. You kick a door open, and I'll rush through it, and you might never rein me back. We talked in the previous episode about this boundary. It's just a fantasy, but this boundary within which we hold the self. And because of that boundary, because of the whole blindness that it inevitably instills in us, the self becomes something we have to fix. The self becomes something we have to manage. The self becomes something we have to run. And then, the things that we crave in our souls, peace of heart, integrity, as you say, presence, harmony, grace, to feel your life touched by grace. The things we crave, we try to supervise ourselves towards. When you're supervising yourself towards grace, or towards integrity, or towards compassion, you are in a divided state. There's the part of you that knows what compassion looks like and is bringing the rest of you along to achieve it. So to set those ideals, wonderful as they are, how can anyone argue with setting compassion as a means of orienting your life? But doing that in our culture carries this tacit risk that the moment will come when you're entering a situation, you say, oh, I should be compassionate here. And you know what that looks like. And you know how it expresses itself. And there's a part of you that is, you are in a divided state because that knowledge is sitting in governance over your actions. So in that boundaried state, all we can do is manage and supervise and guide ourselves towards what we most crave. All of those qualities are inherent in the present. The present is utterly at peace. The present is completely at play. The present expresses itself in harmony in every moment through which it moves. Grace is born of the present. And here we are, we've divided ourselves, cordoned ourselves off from the present, trying to make these things happen within us and holding on to knowledge and advice and moderation in all things, that'll work. Or, whatever it might be, put your heart first, that'll work. All these things. And it's a fantasy. And it's only in wholeness that any of those become possible. And wholeness is different from any of those other capacities, because I can achieve compassion. I might be able to achieve peace if I do it properly. I can't achieve wholeness. I am whole. I can't step out of wholeness. There's no escaping wholeness. I can desensitize myself to it, but I am embedded in wholeness in every moment of my life.
So
all I can do is surrender to wholeness.
That was my question. I was just about to interrupt you and ask you. So if not achieving,
it's there. It's
surrender
running through me. It's in my blood. It's in my breath. All I can do is surrender to it. Now, when I do surrender to my wholeness, I'm utterly at peace. I can be no other than compassionate. I act with complete integrity. That's what wholeness is. So that divided state to which we've married ourselves is thwarting the very things we most crave. And surrender, which our culture warns against, is the only means by which we might partake of them. And that surrender, when I say surrender, that is such a physical sensation for me. When I feel my awareness drop and my energy come to rest, and I let go of agenda and idea, and I allow them to integrate and arrive in the present. Surrender isn't an idea. Surrender is a physical return to the present.
Mm. Mm. I think we're remarkably close to what appears to me to be a place of recharging, a place of great nurturance that seems to bubble up here in that notion of letting go, of surrendering. There's I've been to this particular place a number of times in coaching sessions with activists, people who have found it in their hearts to be engaged in the world with something that moves their heart, something that gets them out of bed every morning, something that makes life worth living for them. And they get up and get out into their day after day, and they all they know to do is live life in the orientation of the business as usual human operating system, with all of its foibles, all of its fatal flaws, which a couple of which we've covered in these two sessions together. And the exhaustion that comes from that, well, I think we've all heard the stories, and perhaps there are many activists among the viewers here that could be nodding at this moment at the exhaustion that comes from trying to continue to get out of bed every morning and be motivated by that depth of heart and depth of spirit, and yet have no access to a fuel source that comes anywhere near what's needed to face the insanity of our world. Can you speak to the scale that you've experienced as you've experienced what you're talking about and also introduced it to others?
Yeah, well, because what you're doing is you're coming back to that part of agency that you spoke of earlier. And it's a similar thing. It's like the irony is that, we feel disconnected. And how do you reconnect? You reconnect by letting go. I mean, the paradox of that. But what you're letting go of is the disconnected ideas, the agenda. I mean, the greatest frustration in our culture is is having a plan, and that's not the way I planned it. I mean, you're pouring a cup of tea and the sugar spills or whatever. That's not the way. So we fight what is with our marriage to how it should be. And it's in the surrender, in the letting go, that the connection happens, because where do you land? You fall, and you land here. When all the fantasies unravel, you land here. And in the embrace of the present, I think of the body as a resonator. The body's like a bell, and a bell will ring with pure signal. And what we do in our culture is like we stuff that bell full of cotton balls. And the present is nudging us, tapping on our shoulders, and it's not ringing. We're just going dunk, dunk, to the point that we cannot remember the present any longer in its wholeness. It is lost. We've lost our availability to it. And so as the work happens and you let go of those shadows in the body, those cotton balls that deaden the body to the resonance of the present, and you land there, you find the present in every waking moment is whispering you. It's whispering to you, and you are born with a cluster of gifts that no human has ever had. And the present is whispering you, come put those into service, take a risk, give the whole of your heart to it. And even the idea of service, we speak about this boundary around the self. The boundary is the fantasy that drives our culture, is the fantasy of the tyrant of world mythology. And Joseph Campbell was so astute in his assessment of the tyrant. He spoke of the tyrant as the man of self-achieved independence. And self-achieved independence, that sounds pretty good. I mean, that's the self-made millionaire. That's the mansion with the gated entrance and the servants and the theater and the swimming pool and the bowling alley in it. So you never have to come into relationship. Independence is what we've gathered around. And that fantasy of independence draws us. And to lose your connection to the present is to lose the source of what nourishes you. It's to lose your agency. It's when the world whispers to you in that way that your passion is clear and ignited, and you move forward, and nothing will quench that agency. It's born in us by our felt relationship with the wholeness of the world.
How ironic that at every level, relationship with our own deeper selves, our relationships with others, and the relationship with Earth, particularly obviously is our current political situation, in which we have a person who is the president of the United States and is the cartoon caricature of that tyrant that you were just describing. And what I've been really challenged to do in putting together this body of work is to find ways involving as little shame as we can possibly muster. Because the depth of shame, I believe, is going to be an extraordinary wave that will come to humanity sometime soon, to a theater near you. But I'm noticing as you're describing that tyrant character, and also what it is to return to one's sense of agency is to release those fixations, that fixation of attention, that desiring more than anything to have all the accoutrements of that sexy, has it all, self-made man, millionaire, and on the list goes, and to release layer upon layer of that. And what is allowed to bubble up once those pieces are peeled away, when we let go of those elements that the world says we so want, what we're left with is indeed optimal presence, is indeed being able to reach into the place where our agency once lived and actually start to rekindle it.
Yeah, when you step in to that fantasy, that tyrant's fantasy, and the accoutrements that come with it, and all that, you are stepping out of love. And when you look at nature and you look at what nature loves, it's so instructive. I mean, nature loves change. There's no moment that repeats itself. There's no snowflake that stays the same as it falls to the earth. Everything is changing in every moment. Nature loves diversity. It is at play in this abundance of possibility. And we want to make it a binary world. And no, nature, it's a spectrum. And which came first, the chicken or the egg? The egg came first, because its evolution is moving through the egg to create the new chicken. And nature loves service. There is nothing that is born that is not born into service. The earthworm is born into service. The leaf on the tree is born into service. We breathe its oxygen into our bodies. The clouds are in service. Everything in nature is born into service. And then you look at what happens when you step into the tyrant's fantasy, which is identical with stepping into the head and dissociating from the body. It's identical. And when you step into the tyrant's fantasy, you resent change because you rely on known relationship. You fear diversity because conformity lends itself to control, and that's your agenda. And you serve only yourself. And when you serve only yourself, that self-regard becomes narcissism, and that self-regard leans on what can be accumulated, and that self-regard, deprived of the love out of which it is stepped, yearns for flattery, and yearns for assurance, and yearns for security. And when you live that way, when that is your normal, that is also what you seek in your leader.
I'm curious if I could just follow that thread a little bit further and add a couple of words that I've been stumbling into since I know that you also had quite a bit of coaching from Andrew Harvey in your first book. And I had both Andrew and Carolyn were kind enough to give me some coaching in mine, and mine needed a lot of coaching. In the second writing of my book, sparked by their coaching, I ran into a couple of words, time and again, that were so far from the original intent of The Impossible Conversation, is the name of my book, and it was all about, my confronting the collapse of human and earth systems, and how it was just literally mind-blowing to me that what I had encountered was that it's happening much more quickly and more intensely than one could ever imagine. And again, these elements showed up in the second writing, and the second writing coincided with Donald Trump campaigning to become president and then becoming president. And the words that kept showing up were contempt and violence. What I'm trying to say with the words contempt and violence and how they showed up was, I would ask myself time and again in writing the book, what got us to this brink? What happened to get us here? And that time and again, it was the same answer every time, some variant of it, that we had disconnected. We disconnected from ourselves, each other, and Earth. When I heard you just describe what's available when we are in full presence, there was this implied depth of relatedness. There was this effortless immersion in relatedness. There was no effort called for, and there was a word that I was surprised that you used, but it makes complete sense. It resonates for me: service. That in nature, it's actually an expression of service, that each thing is who they are. And what I'm trying to point out with the contempt and violence point is that I kept discovering what we've landed in is an atmosphere, a constant neck-deep atmosphere that we're in all the time of contempt and violence, which appears to me to be something on the close to the opposite of service. Service seems to be an expression of interbeing, of love. And when those things are not present, when I am disconnected from the web of life, anything that intrudes upon me, anything that calls upon me, is something I have contempt for. It's costing my attention. And oftentimes my reaction is violence. So I'm bringing those up as my way of noticing in this past year deep insights that have come. And unfortunately, in the shadow side of how the human operating system works, in its deep disconnection from everything, and how beautifully you counterpointed it by pointing to this ease, this effortless essence of service that shows up in the natural world.
Yeah.
Any thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, like I watch, this sparrow leaves this tree and flies around and lands on that tree, and what the heck's it doing? Why did it do that? Well, it's in service. It is weaving the harmony of the world into wholeness with its every breath. And those qualities, of contempt and violence, characterize how we relate to the body. We hold its intelligence in contempt. We hold its sensitivities in contempt. And we're more than happy to do violence to it. We're more than happy to shovel sugars into it because we want that high. We're more than happy to let it sit in a chair for 8 hours a day because we've got this agenda. And, even in our, there is violence in the world. A wolf takes down a deer. There is violence that is in service. And you think of Aboriginal tribes who went hunting and would thank the deer for giving its life to keep them alive. And how do you sit down and eat a chicken leg and give thanks to this creature that has been penned up with thousands of others in an airless, lightless factory? How do you do that? That violence, it's a cycle that infests every corner of our world. And to understand your agency, to step back into love, out of that isolated prison of the fantasy of the tyrant, into love, is to have your agency activated by love, even where love seems impossible. I mean, I think of Mother Teresa in service. She can't solve the problems of poverty that surround her, but she can offer love to this child and do everything she can to bring this child it back into wholeness. And in that service of love, her soul thrived, even without any of the things we think are necessary to happiness. Our capitalism. The word capitalism comes from a Latin word that means the head. Capitalis means the head. And to buy in to the values of capitalism is to buy into the values of the head. And it's an isolated, self-serving, loveless, and I say loveless, not the people who live in their heads can't love, but they are not living in the medium of love. They don't. People feel alone, and you think it's impossible to feel alone. How could you feel alone? The whole of the universe. You lift your arm. The whole of the universe shares in that and feels that. The table you sit at is made of wood that was nourished by the breath of your ancestors and breathed oxygen into the air that nourished them in return. There is only companionship there. You share the life that you call yours is shared with the universe. And yet we feel alone. And in that aloneness, we do such damage because fantasy can only damage the harmony of what is.
Mm. Philip Shepard, I'm clear. We could record many sessions and barely scratch the surface of your work. I'm wondering if we could shift gears just a little bit. And now you've been training people in these methodologies for quite some time and around the world. And what I'm wanting more than anything, partially just selfishly for myself, but also for anyone who's smart enough to be experiencing this series, I'm looking for practices, and I'm looking for any wisdom that you could offer us, anything from your own experience that you could share that helps to keep these extraordinary distinctions that you've been sharing with us, that helps to keep us oriented toward our pelvic floor, toward a far more interrelated way of being in the world, and give us some sense of how on earth do you keep yourself with an open channel and an access to your own sense of agency and your own sense of connection with the web of life, because you're as much in the world as any of us. And so if there's anything you could share with us that you found valuable, helps to keep you with that extraordinary sense of home, of deep home that you've been describing to us, I would sure appreciate that.
I would enjoy it too. Where I'm drawn is when this distinction, when you live in the head, when that's where your allegiance is, you live in a world of ideas. You live in known relationships. When you come back to the body's intelligence, you live in a world of energy. Everything is energy in exchange with everything else. And you can feel that, but you can't pin it down and know it because it's moving. It's moving. And we talk about a mind-body split in our culture. And that too is a complete fantasy, because it implies there is such a thing as a mindless body. This is the mind, this is the body. No, the body is suffused with intelligence. And, we suffer a split, but it's a mind-mind split. It's this cordoned off, contracted intelligence of abstract thinking that has divided itself from the thinking of our being. And so once you recognize that mind suffuses the whole of your being, you begin to recognize the equivalence of mind and energy. So when my body's energy is jittery, my mind is jittery. When my mind is at peace, my body is at peace. I go for a massage and my being is through the body carried into an energy of peace, and my mind is right there with it. You walk on a beach on a windy day, and it's just, there's this sense of spaciousness in the body as it opens to these sensations, and there's a spaciousness in the mind. So there's no time at which my mind is separate from my body. And once you understand that, then this modern dilemma of how do I bring my mind to peace, you have another doorway into that. How do I bring the body's energy to peace? And as I understand it, energy does not belong up here. To go back to that bell analogy, I want my body to be spacious and open and available to the mindful present in which I'm embedded. My energy is of the earth and belongs in a place of rest on that intelligence. So I'd love to do a little practice that recognizes that and takes us there. So just gently bring your attention to the breath. And notice how the body releases to the in-breath. And feel the body release to the out-breath as though on a sigh. It's receiving the gift of oxygen, and it's releasing the gift of life-giving carbon dioxide. And gently scan your body to just notice its energy. And there may be a little coiled bit of anticipation somewhere. And if so, just notice it there without judging it, without needing it to be anything other than what it is. The step that matters most is to notice it and accept it. There may be a little bit of anticipation held in the jitteriness of your cells. Just notice that, notice it without asking it to be different in any way. There may be energy in the legs, and how does that energy show up? How do you feel that energy in the legs? How do you feel the energy in the pelvic bowl? How do you feel the energy in the head? Thoughts are just energy. How do you feel the energy through the whole of your being? And feel it with as much specificity as you can, just as it is. It's like opening your eyes on a star field at night. And there it is, this energy suffusing the whole of your being. And then gently give that field of energy permission to begin to melt. And you feel it melting within the body. And as it melts, it begins to trickle down through the body like water through pebbles. And you feel the energy in your legs melting and begin to trickle down. You feel the energy in your body and your head melting and begin to trickle down. And you feel this cascade of trickling down through the body, down through the legs, and you feel the first little trickle arrive on the soles of your feet, and it pools there inside each foot. And those pools grow as the energy trickles down to join them. And they begin to rise up inside the legs like a tide. And still you're gently, gently noticing the energy in your body, giving it permission to begin to melt, and feeling it trickle down inside the body. And those pools rise up through the legs, rise up eventually into the pelvic bowl, rise up to the top of the pelvic bowl just below the belly button. And allow that energy to deeply, deeply settle, and feel the spaciousness above that, wide open to the present. And just gently scan the body and notice if there are lingering bits of energy, and feel them as specifically as you can. And give them permission to melt, and feel them trickling down inside the body like water through pebbles until they eventually arrive in that deep, deep reservoir in the legs and the pelvic bowl. And allow that energy to deeply, deeply settle. You feel that energy coming completely to rest on the soles of your feet. You feel it join the earth. You feel it join the present. And above that fluid energy is this spaciousness in the body, spaciousness enough for all the world to live there, spacious enough to feel everything passing through you. And that groundedness of the fluid energy roots you in a way that whatever passes through you can be integrated, can be integrated. And that paradox of the grounded energy in the pelvic bowl and the legs, and that spacious availability above, is a mirror of what we talked about earlier, that intelligence is grounded sensitivity. And there it is in your body, the groundedness of that fluid energy in the pelvic bowl and the legs, and that available sensitivity above it. And feel how the world shows up in that state of grounded sensitivity. And understand that you can choose to allow that to happen anytime, anywhere. You can be at the grocery store and let your energy settle into the present. You can be talking with a friend and allow that energy to settle. And any energy above that, I understand energy held in the body above that as a form of resistance to the present, and it's a reactive form of resistance. And if we're going to move forward, we can't be reactive. We have to respond with integrity. And it's all there in the body.
Well, Philip Shepard, I'm present again to the privilege that it is to have you join us and to share this remarkable body of work that you've created. And we're facing the most extraordinary circumstances that humanity has ever had to face. And it often appears to me that we are critically ill prepared to face any of it on any kind of scale. And it's quite a while ago that I was clear that my experience of this predicament-laden world, that there would be no saving it, that I would do no good by holding a big flag up and setting myself out on a task to save the world. But what I did know was that given this knowledge, this some people call it a wokeness, being woke, that what there is to do is to be as fully present to life as one can possibly be. I also knew, given my experience in the training world, that we have been encased in our heads for the entire track, certainly of America and for most of human history. And that if there was any fulfilling track to be walked, path to be walked after being woke, it was going to involve being embodied, doing it in a body. And it's that realization that had me seek you out a few years back, and I'm so pleased to have met you then in that little Portland workshop that we got to meet. You've now gone from just barely getting your first book out to having your second book out. You've got students all over the world. And there's a word that you mentioned, one of the words you mentioned in one of these sessions that we've been talking, and that word is grace. And for me, that's another one of those features that shows up when I am intentional enough and I'm lucky enough to be in a released state. Grace tends to bubble up. And I feel that whenever I'm connected with your work. I feel really blessed and lucky to have met you, to now know you, and if I may be so bold as to consider you a member of our loosely affiliated Living Resilience Alliance, I definitely consider you a powerful ally.
And it's such an honor to be a part of that alliance, Dean. Thank you.
Mm. Philip, this is sort of one of those last questions before we shift gears. If there were just a moment when you had a megaphone, when you had a microphone, you had a moment in the spotlight where the majority, if not all, of the world's population was ready to hear something that you might like to say, given how you see the world, how you experience the world now. Is there anything that you would like to offer in that kind of fantasy situation?
If people were willing and able to hear what I was saying, I would invite them to be gentle. Gentleness is the quality of felt relationship. When you're not gentle with yourself, when you're not gentle with your breath, when you're not gentle with your neighbors, with the world around you, you're moving out of felt relationship into boundary and known relationship, and the world becomes shattered. And to just allow gentleness. And you think of moving a baby's arm into a sweater. It's the gentleness that allows you to feel the baby as a whole and guide that arm in a state of grace. And our culture is so contrary to gentleness. It practices harshness and abruptness and hurrying and overriding. And gentleness is where we begin to feel who we are.
Well, thank you so much for sharing your power and your gentleness with us, Philip Shepard. Been remarkable being with you in these couple of sessions, and now we get to shift gears and spend a little time addressing some questions, some inquiry from some of the folks who are watching this summit. Thank you so much again for joining us.
It's been a joy, every minute of it. Thank you, Dean.
Hello, everybody. We will be taking approximately a 6-minute break here. I'll have a little video and audio piece playing during that time. So this is a time to get up and move around if that's what you like to do. And we'll see you in just a few moments.
I wrote kindness. I actually was the secretary for kindness. After my husband and I were robbed of everything on our honeymoon, long, long ago. And it was a rather desperate situation. Someone on the same bus with us was murdered. So we didn't get the worst brunt of the evening, but it was rough. And what to do next? This was in the pre-cell phone day and pre-internet day. And we didn't want to call home. Because we were in South America on our honeymoon, and everybody had told us we were crazy to attempt to do what we were going to try to do, which was foiled after a week because we had nothing. So we were going to try to go from the top of South America to the bottom by bus. And a man came up to us and was very kind. And afterwards just spoke to us and was kind. And so afterwards I was trembling, I was very, very anxious, and I just sat. The only thing I had left was a little tiny notebook and a pencil that had been in my back pocket. And I sat in a public plaza in Popayan, and this poem was spoken out of the air to me, and I just copied it down. Kindness. Before you know what kindness really is, you must lose things. Feel the future dissolve in a moment, like salt in a weakened broth. What you held in your hand, what you counted and carefully saved, this must go, so you know how desolate the landscape can be between the regions of kindness. How you ride and ride, thinking the bus will never stop. The passengers eating maize will stare out the window forever. Before you learn the tender gravity of kindness, you must travel where the Indian in a white poncho lies dead by the side of the road. You must see how this could be you. He too was someone who journeyed through that night with plans and the simple breath that kept him alive. Before you know kindness as the deepest thing inside, you must know sorrow as the other deepest thing. You must wake up with sorrow. You must speak to it till your voice catches the thread of all sorrows and you see the size of the cloth. Then it is only kindness that makes sense anymore. Only kindness that ties your shoes and sends you out into the day to gaze at bread. Only kindness that raises its head from the crowd of the world to say, It is I you have been looking for, and then goes with you everywhere, like a shadow or a friend. For me, being a person at that point who really trusted the act of writing things down, that if you wrote things down, you could kind of grow into them later sometimes. You could kind of come to believe them later. Or sometimes something would come out of your pen and pencil and you weren't even sure you understood it. As a comparative religions major in college, I knew that when I was writing these high-blown papers, often I would say something and I'd think, wow, I hope that's true. And need to go back later. Do I need to consult 17 more scholars, or could I really say that? But you know, as a writer, that you can go back and find that pieces that came out of your own pen or pencil could mysteriously continue to guide you for years to come. And on the spot, after I finished writing down it was a woman's voice speaking out of the air. After I finished writing it down, I knew 3 things that I could do right then on the spot. And my next moves in a town where you have no friends, no money, no passport, nothing. What do you do? So it was amazing that simply focusing and calming down to write a few words that didn't even come from me at all. More importantly, they came from somewhere else, that they could guide you.
Well, welcome back, everyone. Naomi Shihab Nye, Kindness is her poem. There's a fresh face showing up in the thumbnails at the top of my screen. That must be Philip Shepard.
Good to see you, Dean.
Good to see you. You got that Santa Fe kind of look to you.
How did you know? Exactly right. It's a gorgeous night in Santa Fe.
All right. Well, I would like to invite everyone to just do the beautiful job you did last time, which is to bring your own questions and statements and experience, and let's have a robust, juicy conversation and explore some more of Mr. Shepard's space. Who's going to begin?
I have a question for Philip. Philip, you gave us a breathing exercise last time, and you said to make a column in your trunk, and at the bottom is the peritoneum, and you said use your body, make it's like a balloon. But I'm wondering, I didn't know whether the in-breath, the peritoneum is then up, and then when you, which way does the breath go with that exercise?
That's a great question. That's just such a specific, great question. So the essence of that practice is to get away from making the breath happen. So we're so used to muscling the breath into the body. We're such a top-down culture that we imagine the breath or even push the breath from the top down into the body because we know a deep breath is important, and so we make it so. But that quality in the pelvic floor of releasing to the in-breath is like the balloon image you spoke of. So the way I pinpoint it for myself is on the out-breath, the pelvic floor provides some support to the out-breath. And even if you exaggerate the out-breath a little bit, and then you can just let go of the pelvic floor and it just drops. So as it lets go, you're not muscling the breath into the body, you are releasing the body to the breath. So if you imagine the balloon again in the pelvic bowl, as the breath fills the pelvic bowl, it's like the balloon is expanding. So the pelvic floor moves down as the balloon fills with the in-breath. and then the pelvic floor releases up as the balloon grows smaller with the out-breath. And the crucial part of it for me is that moment at the end of the out-breath when you just release the pelvic floor. And a friend of mine says it sort of goes kerplunk. And we're not used to letting the body do its own thing. We're not used to surrendering to it in that way and letting it carry us someplace. But when you do release the body to the in-breath and release the body to the out-breath, it always carries you someplace new. It always carries you a little more deeply into your wholeness. And you're not in charge of the destination. And the sense for me when that happens is of the breath filling the body from the bottom up rather than from the top down. It's as though my breath is first appearing on the pelvic floor, and then it fills the pelvic bowl from the bottom up. It's a very different feeling.
Helpful. Thank you.
Yeah. Well, thank you for your question, Claudia. Thank you so much. And I think we should just open the floor to another question if...
Well, the floor is definitely open, so please feel free, folks, to either step up and fill the space, or if someone else is speaking, you might want to just mention your question or a question in the chat, and we can nudge you in at the next opportunity.
I'd love to just comment on Mari Hart's note to everyone, where she says, we've forgotten how to breathe like newborns. That, a newborn isn't consciously making the body do a deep breath. The body is just releasing in its depths to the breath. And it is the most beautiful thing in the world to watch a newborn breathe. Yeah. Rebecca, you came on for a sec. Did you have a question?
Well, I'm just thinking about your talk last week, or on Monday, about the importance of getting out of our head and getting into our body and feeling what's coming up in the moment. And I think that is really an important thing for us to be doing. And you talked about how some feelings are happening because of unintegrated experiences, I guess. And I just wanted to comment on how many people seem to be responding or going through their life from those unintegrated feelings that come up in their body. So their disgust at something, or their anger at something, or their, I don't know if intolerance is really a feeling of the body, but their desire to take some unpleasant action because of what they're feeling towards an idea or a person or something. So when it comes to, to me it seems like we all need a lot of education and practice at really coming back to learning about what is important in what we're thinking and feeling and in everything, because anyway, just thoughts.
Yeah, I'd love to share some thoughts on your thoughts. Because that quality when we have these unintegrated energies, whether they're emotions or whether they're muscle patterns, or there's so many different kinds of them, it's exhausting, because we're always in a state of self-conflict where we're keeping these energies away from the core of our being. So there's one part of us is one way, and the other part of us is another way, and we're in self-conflict, which cannot yield itself or express itself in the grace of the moment. So what happens is an unintegrated, there's sort of two indications of unintegrated energy. One is it's reactive. And, that flash in the pan, that reaction, that, when something's integrated, when you're in a place of wholeness, any opinion that is said, it's not an either or, it's a both and. And the person saying whatever they're saying that may offend your dignity, that may whatever trigger you, is for themselves coming from a truth that's worth considering. And the consideration of that truth is so much more interesting than the reactive state that sort of slots us into that familiar tramline of asserting our truth. The other quality of unintegrated energy is that we feel alone. Wholeness is what joins us to the world. The more unintegrated energies we harbor in our being, the more alone we feel in the world. And that's exhausting as well. It's also, it's like there's an element of fantasy to it, because there is no aloneness. You have kinship with the table you're sitting at and the wood grain of the chair you're on. You have kinship with everything around you. You belong inextricably to it as it belongs to you. Your every breath is felt by the universe. What transpires in the universe passes through you. There is only congress, there is only communion. To come back to your wholeness is to come back to that communion. To be bound with energies that aren't integrated is to be desensitized to that communion.
And I would say that fear is maybe coming. I'm not sure how to say this or what I'm even really thinking, but that increased fear is also maybe part of the that lack of wholeness.
Well, yeah, I mean, one other way to come at that is to look at, these symptoms that take hold of people in our culture. People live with anxiety and consider that utterly normal.
Mm-hmm.
People live with this cloud of depression haunting them, and well, that's just life. And to me, one of the most salient characteristics of either anxiety or depression is, again, that you feel alone in the world. So I really wonder about the relationship. Wholeness, as I said, is the nature of our reality. You can't achieve wholeness. You already are whole. You can't step out of wholeness. You can't escape it. So what you can do is choose to desensitize yourself to it. And we do that with tension and held beliefs and a fixed identity, an idea of who we are, with so many ways. And that disconnection, I think, almost invariably breeds the anxiety or depression or sense of ease and disconnection that haunt our culture, which result directly from our wish even to be alone in the world, to feel our independence. We're urged from childhood to be independent and stand on our own 2 feet, and we're encouraged to feel our aloneness in the world. It's like being nudged into living a fantasy. But it's specifically, in mythological terms, it's specifically the tyrant's fantasy. The tyrant who believes he can be safe by separating himself from the world and exerting remote control over it. Joseph Campbell characterized the tyrant as the man of self-achieved independence, which is kind of ironic, because that's also what the American dream is: self-achieved independence. So we've fastened our hopes and our goals on the fantasy of the tyrant.
Thank you for commenting on that, Samar.
Yeah, my great pleasure. Thank you.
Philip, we have a question from Amy Vegan on the chat, if you wouldn't mind.
Good question, Amy. Which ancient traditions' paths did I study and learn from? Well, I've been so deeply informed by traditions that may not seem to have a direct bearing on what I do. Classical Japanese no theater, which is maybe about as esoteric as you can get. I saw a no play when I was 17, and it changed my life. And I went to Japan and studied no theater. And theater has been part of my life since I was a teenager. And no is deeply embedded in Zen. So so the Buddhist element and the Zen element have profoundly influenced me. I'm not very good at formal study, though. So I've not actually gone and signed up and put in my hours. You could say I'm a dilettante, although it doesn't feel that way. It feels more that I've got this passion to disentangle myself from the tendrils that guide our culture's thinking and our way of being, to find a way of being that feels free. And, freedom, it's dangerous. In our culture, freedom associates itself with the self-achieved independence of the tyrant. So, the tyrant finds freedom in security, and he believes the more secure he is, the more freedom he'll enjoy. And meanwhile, he's building himself a prison. The hero is a completely different thing. The hero, instead of finding freedom in security, finds security in freedom, in that quality of abandoning yourself to being, to undoing what holds you and liberating yourself into the pulse of the present. That is where I find freedom. And so the traditions that had informed that, I'll borrow from anywhere. Christian, Sufi, Buddhist. I'll borrow from theater practices, because here's what's interesting about theater. Any theater exercise that is worth its salt is just another way of learning to be present. And an actor has to learn how to be present in as many worlds as the imagination could summon. And so that discipline of the actor, which in my case was tempered by no theater, has been a huge part of the foundation of my journey. That's kind of a rambling answer to your question, but I hope it's somewhat satisfying. Security and freedom. Yes. Thank you, Amy.
I have a question again.
Yeah.
I want to get one of your books, one that will help me with practices. Which one do you recommend?
Really depends on your literary preferences. So what I mean by that is the first book, New Self, New World, is written with a very fine weave. It's written with a delicacy of thought that doesn't appeal to everyone. So there are people who think it's a tome. It's not a tome, but they struggle with it because of that delicate weave. Radical wholeness is a more relaxed weave. And I loved the challenge of writing a book that would be easier to read without sacrificing any of the clarity. And the books don't cover the same territory. New Self, New World has more practices in it, but Radical Wholeness concludes with practices that in a way are the central practices of my work. Another thing I might just mention is that on my website, I went into a sound studio and recorded 8 practices. They're available on my website. I think it's $22, and you download them and have them forever. And I've had really, really wonderful feedback from people who've listened to them over and over. So that's a third avenue.
Thank you.
Which isn't, I don't want to discourage you from reading one of my books.
Thank you very much, Philip.
Yeah, my great pleasure.
Hi, Philip. This is Lori Powell. And oh, I'm sorry. Did you have another question? Who was that? Okay, Claudia. Okay. So I have 2 questions for you. One, if you would like to speak to Descartes' error as this, there was this book written by a neurologist years ago, Antonio Damasio, where he laid out the research around this one specific individual, Phineas Gage, who had a tapping rod shot through his brain while working on a railroad. And what it taught those around him was how he could be perfectly reasonable, but didn't have the connection to his emotional brain, and therefore made very poor decisions for his life. And so I just wonder if whether or not you're familiar with that work, but if you could speak to the role of Descartes as philosopher, and how, more broadly, how as a culture we laud intelligence and living in our head. So the very theme you're putting forth runs up against a very long tradition and history of intelligence is key, and we must be in our heads to succeed. It's a form of consumerism, actually, but it's not the way we typically think about it. So that's question or theme number one. And the other one was very different but related, which is, what were your reactions to Standing Rock last year as we all witnessed this amazing confluence of people coming together with Native Americans at the center of it all? And prayerful, peaceful gatherings was a theme. I had never heard prayer and peaceful uttered so many times in the media as I did because of Standing Rock. And I would just love to hear your reflections on that experience in our culture.
Well, we'll start with Descartes. My own opinion is that it goes back way earlier than Descartes. It goes back for me to Parmenides. So Parmenides was, oh, Lori, could you put your video on if there's the bandwidth? Because it's so nice to look at you and talk to you. Okay. Parmenides was a pre-Socratic philosopher around 500 BC. And if you look at the genealogy of Western philosophy, almost all of it comes back to Parmenides through Plato. And Parmenides, his primary pronouncement was the modus operandi of Western philosophy. He said, don't trust your senses. Your senses will deceive you. Only reason can lead you to the truth. Now, he went on to prove logically, with reason, that nothing can move. And it's a really elegant argument, actually, which just demonstrates that reason, too, can deceive us. But that dismissal of the body is right there in Parmenides. Don't trust the senses. Reason only will lead you to the truth. And it's on that premise that Western philosophy proceeded. And in Plato's day, I think 350 BC or so, there was a dialogue, Timaeus. And in Timaeus is this wise Greek philosopher, and they say, Timaeus, tell us how the gods fashioned us. And Timaeus begins by saying, well, you know, they fashioned this orb based on the orbs of the heavens. And then they realized that it needed a vehicle to get around. So they grew it arms and legs and a trunk. So there you have, in Plato's day, the head as the self and the body as the vehicle. So that's way before Descartes. What philosophy tends to do, like the philosophy that catches, is it's putting into words what is already being experienced. If Descartes had put into words something other than what felt right to people or what was already being experienced, they wouldn't have paid attention to him. But you know, you look at a watch and the way it ticks and you think, oh, that's sort of like me. I just keep going like the watch until I die. And we've based our understanding on the self through history on the machine. You know, hydraulic fluids were invented, and suddenly there are the humors. And then Galvani comes along and applies electricity to a frog, and suddenly, you know, we're run by electricity, and the myth of Frankenstein comes along, and then the computer comes along, and oh, the brain is just like a computer. So we're science generally, in popular science, generally lags behind experience. It's putting into words what's already there in our experience. So it's in the Neolithic Revolution that our center began to rise up through the body. In Homer's day, it was in the chest. So Homer uses the word phrene, P-H-R-E-N, over and over. And people don't pay attention to this, but phrene meant diaphragm, and it meant mind. And it's not that they got their anatomy wrong. That's where they experience their thinking. And Richmond Lattimore preserves that in his translations of Homer, where he'll have a character say, you know, the mind within my breast understands your words. So he's carrying the sense of phrene into the translation of Homer. But then by Plato's day, we're up in our heads, and that's where we've been ever since. So it's a very, very old story. And I don't lay the blame on Descartes, although he was a particularly enthusiastic zealot when it comes to the dominance of the head. Standing Rock, it breaks my heart to think of Standing Rock. It affirms for me how dulled we are to feeling, how the bottom line runs everything. I mean, the word capitalism, it literally means headism. The Latin word for head is caput, capital. Capitalism means headism. The values of capitalism are the values of the head, dissociated from the body. And until we forge a new way of being, we will be run by those values, and hearts are breaking. The earth is crying out, and the insensibility, the dullness, it is so stuck. And the people who hold the power are people who tend to live in their heads, and they're the ones who have the money. And until we can until it becomes shameful to hoard, until we recognize hoarding as a sign of fear and as a sign of the tyrant and as a disconnection from being, because there is, our culture no longer understands enough. What's enough money? There's no number, right? What's enough technology? There's no number. What's enough science? We've lost all sense of enough. And the reason we've lost all sense of enough is because we've dissociated from our being. And when you come back to your being, when you drop into the body and land there and come to rest in the present, that is enough. Your being in this moment, in this world, in this place, in this body, there is enoughness. And to dissociate from that is a form of neurosis. It's a form of sickness. And the very people we adulate for their success and power, we should be offering them sympathy and counsel. And that's what Standing Rock brings up for me. Thank you so much for your question.
Hi, Philip. This is Jordan from Santa Fe.
We meet again.
We met tonight.
I gave a talk in Santa Fe tonight, and Jordan was there.
I knew you'd be there because I saw you here. Well, I have a question. One of the things that brought me to this summit is, I guess, knowledge, concerns, feeling about abrupt climate change, and where I believe we're headed, which is not a real good place, with collapse of living systems and our society and our civilization, I guess I would say, and immersing myself in choosing to immerse myself in learning about this and understanding it has brought up a tremendous amount of grief for me. And it's something that I move through, I'm with the understanding of what's happening, and I see loss occurring, see changes on the planet. I study it. I study the science. In a way, doing this really helps me. Being actively in a grieving process feels like it, in a way, and I can't explain how, but it fortifies me and strengthens me and provides me with a sense of resilience. And actually, I'm wanting to deepen that even further. Like, it feels like, in a way, it's not enough. Like I have a sense that through your work or some of the things you're speaking about, I can cultivate, more resilience, more connection that'll help, at least within me, heal some of this feeling. And I don't know if resolve it is the word, but just, be with it. And I'd really like to hear what you have to say about grieving at this kind of level in an intentional way. Would you share your thoughts, please?
Yeah, I mean, it's so easy to be, you know, the ostrich with its head in the sand. It hurts less. We share this planet. We're called to action. I think the more specifics, the more deeply you understand what is happening, the clearer your specific mission becomes. In my understanding, the present, the world, calls to us through the body. So that's why one of the reasons why embodiment is so crucial to me is that if my body is clear and I feel the present in its wholeness, in its grief, in its beauty, in its agony, you know, we're all born with a unique set of sensitivities and gifts and strengths, and that will resonate to the present. The more deeply embodied you are, the clearer the resonance. And then, you know, you're called into service, right? And it's in that service that you're doing what you can. That it's like you join. I think I talked about this, but I'm not sure I did. There are these things that nature loves, and nature loves change. There's no moment that's the same as the preceding. It'll never be repeated. Nature loves diversity. It's abounding in diversity. It's not, did the chicken or the egg come first? The egg came first because every chicken is a new expression of chickenhood, a new step on the diversity of evolution. There's no stopping diversity. Nature's at play in a profusion of diversity, and nature loves service. Everything that is born into service. The earthworm wriggling underground, the sparrow in its flight, the tulip in its blossom. Everything is born into service, everything. Now, the more you live in the head, the more alone you feel from the world, the more you give your allegiance to the tyrant, the more you begin to oppose everything nature loves. Suddenly you resent change because it's interfering with your plans. You fear diversity because conformity is easier to control, and you want control above all, and you serve only yourself. So to step out of that and find your calling is to not just join what nature loves, it's to join your true nature. It's to allow its expression. And you do that with love, you do that with joy, and you do that in the moment.
I get it. And I guess embracing within myself all that is, like not having to separate from, what we call negative emotions and positive. It just flows, it's all one.
Yeah.
And that informs us.
There's no emotion I would ever call negative.
Right.
It's energy, right? It's a response to life. Now, there are unintegrated emotions, integrated emotions, and I really do distinguish there. But if I'm in my wholeness, any emotion is possible. That's not true. If jealousy is an emotion, I can't imagine jealousy in my wholeness. That's interesting. But joy, fear, terror, anger. I mean, of course there's righteous anger. How can you call anger how could you watch a child being humiliated or hurt and not feel anger?
Of course.
Yeah. Emotions are there to run their course. And what an emotion does is it pulls the world into focus. Your love pulls the world into focus, right? It's so emotions bring things to us, and it's all part of it. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Good to see you.
Good to see you again.
Hi, Philip. I want to ask you a question that is a day-to-day issue for me. And I'll start off with the expression of, I'm tired. But I get a real sense that it waves throughout my day. It's not so much that I'm tired, it's almost like tired is me. And there's something happens to me where my thoughts get jumbled. I became annoyed, I become irritated. It's a state which, if I'm smart enough to just run and take a nap, that all eases back up again. So, but I notice, because I'm so embedded in the world that separates mind from body, I look to ask myself, well, am I emotionally tired? Am I physically tired? What's going on? Where's the tiredness located, as though it were real? It feels real. And what I really would like it is if you'd be willing to comment upon tiredness, exhaustion, and what's the role of sleep for a human being?
Yes! It's so good to see you again, Jordan. All right. I see tiredness and exhaustion as opposites. So if I were to define tiredness, I might say tiredness is a state in which you cannot exhaust yourself. You don't have the energy to exhaust yourself. You know, if I run 10 miles, I'm exhausted. If I put my whole heart and soul into writing for 5 or 6 hours, I'm exhausted. And there is a bliss in that exhaustion. Tiredness is in my experience, is usually an indication of self-conflict. The attrition we put ourselves through, where our energy is pushing against our energy in some way or another, I mean, can happen in so many ways. How to then let go of that and land in the present and come home to yourself. And to me, that journey happens through the body. I feel myself drop down through the body, and my awareness comes to rest on the perineum. And suddenly, there is a clarity to my life. Tiredness, to me, the state of tiredness is like white noise as opposed to pure signal. Exhaustion has its own clarity to it, right? If I do a workout and I'm just, pushing myself to the limit, and it's over, and there's such a clarity through my being at the end of it. So we think of tiredness as a stage, one stage on the way to exhaustion, and I find them, to me, they're mutually exclusive. If you're tired, you can't exhaust yourself because, and to me, it's symptomatic of self-conflict. I don't know how that lands with you, but my recourse is self-conflict is a conflict of energy within my body. Energy, to me, the body's energy and the mind are identical. So the body's energy is this umbrella term I use, the energy of my thoughts. It could be the energy of my emotions, the energy of my muscles, the energy of my soul. All of that is experienced as this field of my body's energy. And my body's energy is either incoherence as a field, or it's like white noise. It's at odds with itself. And so a lot of my work is about how do you surrender to the present? Because the present is what harmonizes. I can't own grace, I can't own harmony, but I can harmonize with. I can't achieve peace, but I can join the present, which is always peaceful. And so that descent down through the body to come to rest on the pelvic floor is at one and the same time a means of coming to rest in the present. I think your mic is turned off. Can we get Jordan's mic back on?
Harvey.
Oh, Harvey, I'm sorry, Harvey. I'm
Oh,
looking at
okay.
Sorry, Harvey.
No problem. But I presume you sleep. I presume almost
I
everybody.
love sleep.
Yes. When do you need it? I know it has something to do with at least physical tiredness. I know that it's useful. I know I wake up as a whole new person than when I went to bed. How does that fit into everything that you're speaking of?
Well, I'll give you my opinion, which has no scientific pedigree to it whatsoever. My understanding of the dream state of sleep is that my unconscious mind is sorting through the world to weave it into wholeness. So in the course of a day, we get so many impressions and this, that, and the other, and what it feels like in my dreaming is I'm bringing those pieces, disparate pieces, into relationship, and I am moving in some way or another towards wholeness. I'm weaving into wholeness. So that exhausted, scattered state that comes upon us, and you give into it. The conscious mind is primarily analytical. Analysis means breaking apart, pulling to pieces. Something else carries us into wholeness. And, we can access that in the pelvic bowl, but there's that large, large need of the conscious mind to step aside and allow the unconscious to draw on all these fragments of our world and bring them into a relationship and move them into wholeness. At least that's how I experience it.
Mm-hmm. All right, thank you.
Yeah. Thank you, Harvey. Sorry I got your name wrong. And it's so lovely to
Not a
see
problem.
you. Yeah. Thank you.
Hi, Philip. I haven't really seen you yet on the video. We have just about 5 minutes left, and it looks like we have someone who wants to ask a question. Could we have a quick question, Tim?
Sure. Yeah, I just wanted to reflect, Philip, on something I think I heard you say and make sure I got it right, because I found it fascinating. When you say body, I had sort of taken that to mean like physical body, like you could think of like muscles, like I move my arms and my legs, that kind of thing, or maybe sort of internal organs like heart and pumping and, breathing and all that sort of stuff. But the way you just described the energy of the body was not exclusive that way of thoughts and emotions and all, but the energy of the body was the totality of all that. And I wanted to make sure that's really what you mean by that.
Yes, Tim. And not only that, but I find an identity between the body's energy in that umbrella inclusive sense, which when I'm feeling myself, that's what I'm feeling. Mm-hmm. There's an equivalence between that and the mind. So if my body's energy is at peace, my mind's at peace. If my body's energy is agitated, my mind is agitated, right? And you know, if my body's energy feels spacious, my mind feels spacious. And so there's this thing of how do you bring the mind to peace? Well, why don't we look at the body's energy and notice it and feel it and allow it to drop down and ground itself and come to peace. And then the mind is at peace.
Excellent. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
I just have one comment. Just as I love to review what I've learned from not only you, Philip, but Rebecca Martinson, excuse me,
Yes.
speaker from last week. And here's what I wrote verbatim what she said, because it connects very nicely with what you've been teaching us. And I quote, "Whatever the emotion or thought, no matter how embarrassing or despicable or shameful, 1, welcome it, so you just speak to it, and 2, feel it in the body." So I just wanted to basically say that maybe that was by design from Dean and Carolyn, that the two of you, you succeeded Becca, but in any event, it's nice to see that continuity between speakers and concepts for us to learn about. So just
we laid awake nights planning how we orchestrate everybody's thinking.
I just like to comment on that, you know, if I give an allegiance to wholeness, if I orient my life, you know, by wholeness, not by any of the other values, but what if I truly yield to an experience and live my wholeness, then I have to accept that wholeness excludes nothing. There's no emotion that excludes. There's nothing it pushes away. There's nothing it condemns. The shadow, the light, all of it. But in wholeness, it's like my image of wholeness is a murmuration of starlings. You get 250,000 birds lifting into the sky and condensing and rippling, and in my wholeness, I'm allowing all parts of myself to come into relationship with all other parts of myself. And they adjust to each other and attune to the world. My wholeness there's no boundary between my wholeness and the world around me. So as I come into harmony, I am joining the present and held by it and guided by it. So all of that for me happens through the body. Yeah. Or I might say it happens in the body. Let me say the body is the most concrete, practical, tangible way for me to discover where my wholeness is compromised and where a surrender is required to move more deeply into it. Thank you.
Thank you, Philip. Thank you, Lori. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, everyone, for this incredibly rich, gorgeous two nights with Philip. Thank you. And I am invigorated and feeling very privileged to be with all of you and to be again in the presence of Philip and his wisdom of the body.
I'd just like to say what an honor it is to be a part of this. I would do anything I could to support the work that you and Dean are doing. It's so needed in our times. Thank you.
Thank you, Philip.
We love you, Philip. Thanks so much for being with us.
My great pleasure. Absolutely. All the best to everyone.
We'll see you on Monday.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.